Testing. All right, which sounds okay. YouTube. Yeah, YouTube sounds fine.
See if the YouTube chat works.
First Ego Chall Podcast episode 25 is live now on Twitch and YouTube. Come say hi. Post. Let me do Twitch. Oh, nope. Oh, Jesus Christ. Alrighty, tweets up.
Okay.
I just want to make sure when I'm going to mute the new mic, I just want to make sure it doesn't pick anything up from my headset when I do that. So talk.
No, that's good.
You couldn't hear anything?
No.
Cool. I just have to be careful. If I touch this at all, it's like a little, just a touch thing. It's like I can do it very easily, but if I adjust it and put my finger on it accidentally, that'll mute it. So I just gotta be careful.
Yeah, mine's a button, so and it shows if it's in or not. I mean, nice. I just never do it, so.
Yeah. All right, this is it's a touch one and it's green, and when I press it, it turns red. So it's
Yeah, but if you're not paying
it's not
attention.
rocket science, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Hello and welcome to episode 142 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking a roster change in the Call of Duty League. Maybe the first one of 2025, technically, maybe, or definitely the last one of 2024, if not. And we also are talking about the Call of Duty League wish list that we have put together separately, and we're going to talk about maybe what we would like to see happen in the Call of Duty League, or maybe more broadly in Call of Duty esports in 2025. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Big?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I think that's an interesting caveat there. I don't think technically the move was announced, but only the one part of the move. We don't know the replacement player, so either way you look at it, we got a roster move to talk about, and it's maybe a little more on the nose and less surprising than the Optic Hook move just a couple weeks ago now. So yeah, I'm ready to hop right in.
Yeah, I think people were expecting or possibly thinking about a change with the Vegas Falcons pretty much from the moment that they were announced. The idea that this was an all Saudi Arabia roster, that none of these players had really proven themselves in not only the Call of Duty League, but not even really North American Call of Duty. And obviously that's a big thing for them to just come in and try to compete at the highest level. And they haven't had a lot of success doing so. They're 0-4 in the 2025 CDL season so far. We have talked a lot about them and how competitive or not competitive they have been. And we've pretty much come to the conclusion that they are, a bad team if you're just looking at their relation to the rest of the league. But it hasn't seemed like a complete disaster where they're getting 100-point clubbed. So that's a win. But I would say that this roster change is probably a loss, and it is probably no fault of their own. But earlier this week, it was announced that Kicks will be stepping down from the roster and returning to Saudi Arabia to deal with personal issues. So first and foremost, best wishes to Kicks and everything with that. Hope things go well and he can come back to the CDL as quickly as possible. But as just far as the actual gameplay and the effect on the Vegas Falcons, this will have a pretty big effect, I would imagine. He was, by all accounts, the best player on the team. He seemed like the most promising prospect on the Vegas Falcons. And he is now gone, at least for the time being. Maybe he will come back at some point, but he will be replaced reportedly by an academy team player. So the Vegas Falcons has a few players on their academy team. It seems like that will be the direction they go in replacing Kicks for the time being. So let's just start there. Your first thoughts on Kicks, leaving the Vegas Falcons and going back to Saudi Arabia, and the impact it might have on Vegas.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like you said, wishing him the best with everything he's got to deal with, and I do think, like most people in the community, the common reaction that I've been seeing at least is that he was one of the better players, at least statistically, and when you're watching the games, just felt like he was performing pretty well individually. So obviously, anything that could potentially derail his development in terms of trying to get up to speed with um, the pro game and competing in NA, all that stuff. That obviously sucks, but hopefully, whatever's going on with him, he gets it resolved. He gets back in action soon, and then we get to see how things go from there. But yeah, I think that's like my overall takeaway for just if anybody was making a move on the Vegas roster is just you're coming over with this all Saudi team that's already at a disadvantage just in terms of having a lack of experience competing against the best of the best in North America. And once you play a couple matches with that team, like I've pointed out across multiple episodes now, there were definitely some moments where it was like, okay, these guys can shoot straight. They get some good direction from Clayster and crew on the coaching side of things. Like maybe they'll be able to figure some stuff out once they, start playing some more. So then to have a roster change be like thrown into the mix there and possibly have to just switch up any roles or chemistry and all that stuff that can affect the makeup and construction of a team. That this can hurt Vegas, but also it gives someone else an opportunity to jump in and potentially prove that they're worthy of uh, competing at this level. And, I'm not going to sit here, and I don't think you are, and pretend we know anything about the academy team on Falcons and who could potentially come in and replace Kicks. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And once that individual starts playing, we'll see how things go from there. But yeah, that's just, the immediate reaction, especially when it's somebody who's been playing pretty well and a team that's like just looking to gain that experience and stuff. It it sucks, but hopefully, whatever personal issues are going on for him and stuff, he gets resolved, and we'll see him back competing soon. Um, I do. I lost. Oh, I was looking at the roster on the CDL website and don't know if it's because he's a coach or what, but Clayster is listed on the roster if you go to the CDL website. I feel like that would be what a lot of people would want to see from a CDL perspective, just fandom. I don't know how well that would go, obviously, though. I think it would be very beneficial for the three players playing alongside Clayster because he would just basically be like doing the coaching while playing. And I think it wouldn't be great for Clayster statistically, and it would lead to a bunch of losses, I feel like. So I don't think it's something that they'll do, but I do think, if they didn't have the academy team and Clay was listed as a sub and they had to throw him in, that would be kind of interesting. But doesn't sound like they're going to go down that route. Oh, I remembered what I was going to say now. The other part of this, I think it was Jacob Hale who tweeted that there are rumors going on around King Abadi potentially being replaced as well in the roster. So the official announcement from Vegas only mentioned Kicks. And then it said, we're using this opportunity to integrate players from our academy team to ensure we stay competitive while focusing on the long-term success of the project. So we're not going to know right off the bat here who's coming in, if there is potentially more than one player joining, and potentially King Abadi like being replaced as well as Kicks. So bunch of moving parts here. I do think that one tidbit there too is like the long term, what was the exact phrase, long term success of the project. I think that's like important to point out too, because that's been part of the narrative that I have been mentioning. And obviously I feel like other people are thinking it, if not saying it as well, as like um if this Falcons Saudi roster fails this year, does Falcons just completely scrap the all Saudi identity and try and throw the bag at some players and make a super team with NA talent? Um, Obviously that's a very small snippet of the announcement there, but saying like the long-term success of the project and having the academy team, and now using the academy team to an extent to figure out how to uh, make a roster change, it makes me believe that the Falcons is going to stick with the all Saudi roster construction for, the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and to kind of deal with your last point first, that's exactly what they did in Counter Strike. They signed a bunch of really high profile
Yeah.
players. They didn't have a Saudi team. I believe Simple was on loan to Falcons at some point. From Navi. So like, if we're going off of that same logic, maybe at some point that will happen where they're like, well, screw it, like, we want to be competitive with Optic, we want to be competitive with LAT, and we have the money to do so, so we're going to actually use it and try to go after some of these big players. We'll see if that is the case. It does seem like that will be more of an off-season play than this season, obviously, because of all the players that are already under contract. But I think it's an interesting thought. Just to kind of finish up on the Saudi point. Luti, who's the coach of Falcons, and he's been with these guys for a few years now. At this point, he responded to Benji Nissim's tweet talking about like what the Falcons have to do for Challengers Elite. If they're to qualify for season 1, because then they would, if they're bringing someone up from the academy roster, they would obviously need someone else to fill that void. And Luti said, "We've tried to make a plan which puts both of our teams in the best possible position going into Major 1 and Elite 1, and we'll use the scrims, online games, and the Elite to work out our best options going into the first Major. We have also brought Hamza Frosty, which some people might know as Glow Frosty or Hamza, into play with our academy team. Now that we only have 7 players, Elite 1 ends January 23rd, so we have a number of scrims and another online game before Major 1 to rotate should we need to. I wasn't aware of the rulings regarding changes throughout the Elite, but I want to try and give all players a fair opportunity without abusing this ruling. The timing with the holiday break was not ideal, but we have done what's best for both teams and look forward to introducing some new talent to the CDL." So from what he is saying, and I don't think any of us really thought that Clayster was going to come in. Like maybe he would be like a very, very last minute thing. Like if maybe like there weren't players in America when all this happened, like, but it seems that they have players stateside that can come in and slot into the roster for the foreseeable future. And they would just kind of need to fill in on the back end with their challengers team or their academy team to kind of, make sure that everything is all right there. So, like you said, we have absolutely no idea about these academy players. We didn't have any idea about the CDL players, so there's no way we would have known about the guys behind them. I know that the 4 players that are signed or are on the roster, I don't even know how to say some of these names, like D7 Umex. I would just say Dumex. Then there's King, QK4B, and WXSL. Those are the 4 players that are signed to the academy team. Which of those would come up is anybody's guess. I'm sure there are people that would know more about the Vegas academy team than either one of us, but we certainly don't know anything right now. But I think that's interesting. I'm in support of it. I believe that if you're not going to be able to be competitive at the top of the CDL, it is about building a roster that fans can be attached to. And sure, like I'm not saying that a ton of American fans are necessarily going to, latch on to the Vegas Falcons because of this roster, but I'm sure there's a lot of fans like in the Middle East that would really like to see this team, and maybe even going over to Europe. And like there might be just fans in general that want to see something different and not just a bunch of retreads that have been in the CDL and out of the CDL. That this was the old Paris Legion thing that we've talked about before. So I'm in support of it, and to see new talent come in, maybe there could be another another great player. Obviously, Kicks showed a lot of talent, a lot of potential. Maybe there is somebody on the academy team that can do something similar, but I think we'll just have to wait and see on that.
I think on the fandom note you just made there too. I mean, obviously, you mentioned Paris Legion, and they were not the most popular team in the league, except for when Clayster was on the team for that one year. They gained some popularity just due to the Clayster effect, but um, it did remind me of, I believe it would have been in Vanguard, me like one of the early on majors, or maybe it was like major 2 or something like that, where they literally won. It was either it had to have been their first match on LAN or their first match, because I believe that Vanguard year was the year they only won 2 games. So I don't really remember the exact specifics of it, but I just remember it happening on stage, and like a lot of people got behind them because of that component to the narrative, right? I'm pretty sure it was against Seattle Surge back then. Um, could totally be off on that, but I feel like I remember that being the matchup. And I just remember like the crowd was electric at the LAN. Like they did a interview after the match, and fans were going nuts, right? So like I feel like that, like saying, yeah, there's probably not going to be a ton of people just casually supporting the Vegas Falcons, but I feel like once we get on LAN, and if Vegas has that potential to get that first win, like the crowd is going to gravitate towards them, unless it's against Optic. Like if it's against basically anybody else, and Falcons are up like 2 to anything, like yeah, imagine a game 5, like they start winning some rounds in the S&D, like the crowd is just going to be going nuts and trying to get behind them for that first win. So I know what you're getting at, and I don't think I'm totally contradicting it, but I do think just that narrative there, especially behind this project, and the whole messaging and everything going into it now with the all Saudi roster construction, like they're we've mentioned it now, they're inevitably going to win a match. It's just a question of when. And I think some fans will get behind the team in the build up to that, especially if it happens on LAN.
Yeah, there's a definitely a component of like lovable losers and people that they just want to see an upset, and obviously whoever they beat, it's a massive upset. It's something that you're not really expecting to see at that given point in time. So I think that's a really interesting point. Um, but yeah, I just think it's they're doing something different, and I'm okay with different because I would say that some of the teams, a lot of the teams in the CDL have tried to do pretty much the same thing year over year, and it hasn't worked out. And I'm okay with another team saying, we're not going to do that. We're not going to bring in the guys that are like the fringe CDL players that, some years they're in the Call of Duty League, some years they're in Challengers. We're not going to do that. We're going to go with guys that we think we can grow the esport or grow competitive Call of Duty in another place. And I'm completely fine with that, especially if, we have this thing going on with LAG or LA Gorillas, mate, and they are extremely popular in France, even though they don't have any, they have one French player, I believe he's French. And but it's mostly just because Gotaga is pushing them because it's his team, and like that is a good thing for the CDL. Like I think, you look back a few years ago when we had the London tournament, and it's the only non NA tournament in CDL history. People absolutely adored the London Royal Ravens. Like they were kings essentially to those people in England. And if we could get some of that, the regionality, the just like people around the world kind of attaching themselves to CDL teams, I think that would be beneficial because we used to have that. We used to have when, we would go to Esports World Cup and, a team would play Vitality in France, that's a like even if it was Optic, like that team they're in trouble. Like the fans turn against them. Or obviously the only German team that I can really remember off the top of my head is Killerfish from like Black Ops 2 or something like that. Or you go to Australia and you're playing Mind Freak or Tainted Minds. Like there's something along those lines. And we really have lost a bit of that because all of the teams in the CDL are located in North America. Um, all of the players in the CDL are now located in North America, and that wasn't always the case. So just having this different component with the Vegas Falcons is good. But we're not expecting them to be necessarily competitive with kicks or without kicks. But I'm interested to see if what a new player can do or what a new player would look like in this scenario.
Yep.
Anything else on the Vegas Falcons before we move on?
I just wanted to bring up real quick. I went back in the notes and found where we did our preseason predictions, and obviously we both got it wrong the first time around in terms of which team would be the first to make a change. But if you don't count the Optic move, which none of us foresaw, I had said Miami would be the first team to make a change, and you said Toronto. And I just thought it was funny that you said Toronto, and that's not looking too good right now. But we're both wrong either way, either if you count the Hook move or not now, because Vegas did make a move. And I remember talking about that when we were doing that, saying, like, I don't think Vegas is going to make a change because I think they're going to commit to this all Saudi roster, which I guess is right in a sense. But hey, stuff happens and they're making a change.
Yeah, I guess if we'll have to wait and see because obviously the first two roster changes of the season have been due to personal matters. So I want to see which team actually makes the change based on results and performance. Like, granted, we're still wrong.
I like that,
but I just want obviously it will happen probably after Major 1. I think that'll be the time that these teams will actually make the change. And I'm not sure which of the teams will make it because we've tried to predict these things before, even like a few weeks out. And you just never really know what the coaches and the players are thinking at that point in time and whether they believe that they can kind of fix it with this current roster. But, we have, about a month or so until that point comes. But I do see a few roster changes coming in the CDL at that point. But let's move on. Let's talk about maybe the future. Obviously, we are now in 2025, the first Ego Chall podcast of the new year. And happy new year to everybody that is listening or watching. Hopefully it was a fun and safe holiday for you. But what we wanted to do, and if you didn't listen or watched the previous episode that we did a few days ago, episode 141, we did a New Year's resolution for pretty much every CDL team. And we went team by team and we kind of thought, like, what should they strive for? What are we kind of looking forward with each of those teams? Now we want to make it more broad. We're not talking about the teams anymore. We're talking about the league and maybe even the esport in general and what we want to see in 2025 from the CDL, from COD Esports. Obviously, we have bemoaned quite a bit in the CDL at times. I don't think we're like habitual complainers, but we're occasional complainers. I think maybe more me than you. But I think there are always things that could be better in anything. Like, the NFL is the most popular sport or the most popular league in America, and it's ridiculously popular, like even around the world. We're growing in popularity. People still have, tons of gripes about the NFL, the NBA, all that stuff. So the CDL is no exception there. I think first and foremost, what I think both of us would like to see is transparency from the CDL. We might differ on the exact wording of like what exactly do you want them to be more transparent about, but that was the first thing that I wrote down on my wish list was I just want to see more transparency. And what that means to me is when something like this Hacienda stuff comes by, and obviously this just happened last week or something like that, or 2 weeks ago. Well, we didn't hear anything from the CDL about it. We heard like, okay, this is a new map that's coming in, but I don't believe there was anything from Daniel Say or Spence. So I didn't see anything official other than this announcement that this happened. And obviously, after the announcement happened, there were many players and some coaches on Twitter complaining about the process by which this map was put in, and I believe it was rewind that was taken out. And I would just like to hear from the people in charge. I'm not saying that they need to answer for their crimes. I don't think it's that serious, but I would like just more upfront transparency. I want these people to just say like, "Hey, we believe this is the best possible way. We could talk about it later if it doesn't work out, and we can change the process that we do these things with." But I think transparency is a good first step. Do you agree with that? That you want to see more transparency in the CDL?
Yeah, I mean that was my first thing on my list was better communication from the CDL or Daniel Say or just behind the scenes in general. And I will give the CDL credit. They did. I'm pretty sure it started last year. I can't remember if it started the year before, where they were doing the community updates and those like pre-recorded videos and stuff with Spence and Daniel Say. Um, However long ago it started. Regardless of that, just the frequency of those updates and how often they happen. There's no like regularity to it. I feel like they just like it'll be like after Major One last year. I don't remember if it happened after Major One, but just for the sake of this example, they did it after like the first event. It's like, yay, we're getting more transparency from the league office, and then after Major Two, nothing, and then they got some after Major Three, but then nothing after that. I don't remember if that's exactly how it went down, but just for the sake of an example, like it was just inconsistent. Despite like we got teased a little bit of breadcrumbs with the community updates, and it just I feel like it needs to happen more regularly, and I feel like those community updates could be where you discuss some of the stuff like that, like with the Hacienda map change that we talked on the last episode about, where allegedly the players weren't actually uh asked about it, and it was just a decision made by the league based on vetoes from the first set of matches so far in the 2025 season. Um so like whether that's true or not, we actually don't have an answer to from the
Yeah,
CDL.
we
And
just have
like
one side.
and if they do a community update after Major One, let's just say, like they might talk about that, and that's going to be in a month from now. Like, I get this is around the holidays and stuff, so like this specific example, is a little tricky, but I just think in general, like you said, transparency, better communication from those people, the upper echelon of the league, and people behind the scenes making changes and making important decisions, like just getting whatever we can out of them is crucial. And especially in those community updates, like they're never gonna address like super controversial topics or anything that could you know they're going to take like the softball question. So like even if they're like, oh, you submit your questions and we'll answer some on the next community update, like even if there was literally 1 million replies saying, can we get an update on the league's viewpoint of the Pred situation, even if it was worded the most polite and you know intricate way, like they're just not going to address it. We know that's the case, and if they ever did, I'd be incredibly shocked. So there's still there's bits and pieces, and there's always wiggle room, and it's never going to be perfect, but whatever quote unquote more transparency looks like from the CDL, that is something I would like to see in 2025.
Yeah, and I think that's a key part of it, is like we don't really agree, and we as like a community don't really agree on like what transparency or full transparency would mean with the CDL. I don't expect them to tell us literally every single detail, and I don't necessarily want every single minute thing that is happening behind the scenes. Like that would be interesting, but I know that's not realistic for anybody. It's not something that professional sports leagues do. It's not something the CDL is going to do. And I also understand, and I want to say this, I understand that the bind that they are put in, they are not in an advantageous position whatsoever. I think I said it with Hacienda. I said it was a lose-lose, like the way it went down, because they tried to do something different. They tried to do something that would essentially take the power out of the players' hands. Something that we talked about with GA specifically, and people still crapped all over it. They still believed that it was the wrong move. So you really couldn't, in their position, do something right necessarily. Um, that being said, they just have to be more consistent. The community updates are a good thing. I don't even need a video. Like, I don't need to see
Yeah, yeah.
Spence and Daniel Say sitting in some some office in Burbank. Like, I don't care about that. Like, why couldn't one of them just tweet something? Like, I'm not asking for much, because this is not the NBA. This is not the NFL. I don't need Roger Goodell to get in front of a press conference podium and take questions from like the USA Today, Washington Post, New York Times. I'm just asking for a tweet. I'm asking for some transparency, some, kind of give back to the community at times. And I'm not even saying like this is a common thing. Like, there's nothing that I can see on a day-to-day basis where I'm like, man, we need the CDL to talk about this. But it would help, like, especially with like something like ranked play. Obviously, that's not something that the CDL specifically is on top of, but it is CDL adjacent. And having some kind of like liaison from the fans or the competitive community to what we hope is like the developers, or Activision slash Microsoft. I think if it could just be something like that, like, and granted, they probably can't say much. It just feels like we're not getting a lot of information. We also haven't really heard anything on, what was it, the fourth major, and where exactly that will be,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. So some updates on that, like potential places. We have heard rumors and stuff, but that is a big problem. Is like, when there's no confirmation, there's no official word. We have to take, and this is not a shot at any, but like, we have to take Jacob Hale, we have to take Breaking Point, we have to take these different people at their word, because those are the only people that are giving us any information at that time. And whether it's right or wrong, that is the information that we have to work with. And if Daniel Say or Spence or anybody in the CDL, or just like the official Call of Duty League Twitter account, says like, we've narrowed down the potential major four options to these four cities, I think that would just give a better idea. Or in like, this is the timeline that we're working under on when we might make this decision. That's something that would help. But I don't want to make it out to be any bigger than it is. Like, I'm not saying that this is like a detrimental, or like, this is going to doom the CDL or in any way. I just think it could be better. And if this is a wish list, and sometimes you don't get anything or get everything that you wish for, this is something I definitely think most people in the CDL or around Call of Duty esports would wish for, is just a little bit more transparency, more consistent discussions, Q&As, Reddit AMAs, something along those lines, that we feel like we're somewhat connected to what's going on behind the scenes.
And I mean, if you go to the CDL website right now and go to the news section, I'm just gonna like read off the headlines for some of the when it's sorted by latest. The most recent news post is Major One Pick'em is live. After that, tune in for opening weekend to unlock these rewards. Then 2025 League Pack now available in game. 2025 season announcement. 2025 competitive settings. Another pack after that, and then so the seventh latest news post on the CDL website is Optic Texas 2024 Call of Duty League champions. Like, that happened what,
June.
5 months ago now? Yeah, like,
Yeah, it's like 6-7
I
months.
just, I get there's the off season, so it's not the best sample size. We'll have to see, but like, since this current season started, there really hasn't been any communication outside of that initial announcement of the season, where some of the events were, the new minor system, etc. And if you go a little deeper in that news post, I had to click whatever the button is, load more. I only had to click it once to get to this, but the announcement from last year on April 16th, titled "The Future of the Call of Duty League," we dove in depth to that single post, and even that post itself, which I would argue is probably the most important post we've gotten on the CDL website ever in the CDL history. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 paragraphs, and some of those paragraphs you can argue if they're actual paragraphs or not. But I mean, it's not a novel. It's not the longest thing ever. So like using that as an example, what's stopping the CDL from doing like an even shorter post than that? Let's say if that's a 10 paragraph post, give us 4 or 5 paragraphs on, hey, this is the map pool change that happened. This is why we did this. This is why it's coming in. We're going to keep an eye on how this map plays. And as season 2 of Black Ops 6 goes live in game, we'll be examining some of those new maps and whatever is being brought to the game to evaluate how they could fit in the competitive landscape. That's not like super outlandish to I feel like that's something that could very easily be done and communicated, and it just isn't. So that's a simple example. And again, the timeliness I've just discussed in terms of potential announcements when we've only had 2 weeks of online matches, and then we had a holiday break for Christmas and the holidays and New Year's and all that stuff. So there is time for this to change as the season, this break comes to a close next week and the season gets really into full gear again. But no matter what way you look at it, I don't think it is like being super negative or super critical to just say that expecting more transparency and communication from the CDL is something a lot of people would like to see in 2025.
Yeah, for sure. And the map thing was something that you specifically had, I think, pointed out with one of
Yeah.
your wishes. So, do you want to go into that?
I mean, I feel like for this game in particular, there's just been a lot of negativity around the maps, and like before Hacienda was actually added, there were only 2 control maps, right? And I feel like that's just like we saw what happened as a result of that. There was literally vault control being played in all but 2 series out of 24, I think it was. Um, so yeah, I just think in general, Black Ops 6 Treyarch game, and a lot of the Treyarch games in recent years, and even in some of the non-Treyarch games, um, they brought back historic maps from previous Call of Duty titles that are well liked, and they've obviously made some changes to them with the addition of doors and stuff like that have been controversial in their own right. But nonetheless, those a lot of the maps that have been brought back and used in the actual CDL have been some of the better maps, uh, especially in comparison to some of the new ones that were not from previous games. Like you think about um, Black Ops Cold War, like just the fact that Raid in particular was on that in that game. Some of the best moments happened on that map, and that's a map from over 10 years ago, right? So um with this being a Treyarch game, I think there is some potential. Obviously I wouldn't complain if Raid came back. It would feel a little repetitive if they just keep on bringing back the same map. So I wouldn't be, Raid is probably the exception to that. I don't think anyone would complain, but you get some other maps in the mix that people are really big fans of, and that gets people excited to watch the games. It gets more people potentially playing ranked play once the whole hacking situation, cheaters and all that gets settled, if it ever is fully settled. But there's a lot of benefits to bringing back some of those former popular maps, and the alternative, if they don't want to do that, is just have better maps at launch or have better maps waiting in the wings as DLC. And that's a whole different conversation because obviously the CDL doesn't have uh, any control, as far as we know, over what
Yep.
maps are created and designed and put into the base game itself. They have to work with what they're is provided by the actual game. So we'll have to see as we get into the like in-game season 2, season 3 of Black Ops 6, what maps are being added, and if any legacy maps are actually introduced. But I do think, Hacienda being added to the pool, I would be very surprised if that is the only map pool change of the year. So I am expecting more changes to come throughout the rest of the 2025 season, and hopefully there are some big ones to shake up what we currently got, because I know, I feel like that's just the general perception on most of these maps right now, is that a lot of them could be replaced or improved upon if something else was being played.
Maps in general are just a big issue every year in Call of Duty, and it has been for pretty much every year that I can remember. Um, Granted, there are games that are much better than others at this, but I just don't understand why, when a Treyarch game is released, why just like a bunch of Treyarch maps from previous games are not just included in general. Like, you don't have to update them. I really am not asking you to do that. I'm just saying put them in the game, put them in private matches, allow the players to just like, all right, like I want to play this map, and that would just give the CDL more options. Because I fully agree with what you're saying. Like, the CDL has no control over this. Like, they don't say like, hey devs, like put in this map, have this map, and I'm going to show you what the CDL or the competitive community wants out of this map. That they just like get thrown whatever, these 5 maps or whatever that are going to be used in competitive this year, and they're like, okay, like I guess we'll try to figure out the best way to do this. And they get the brunt of like our feedback, and it's a lot of negative feedback usually. But it's difficult, I'm sure, for them. And that kind of leads into another point. It's just, and this has been something we've talked about literally for a decade, I thought would be better because of the connection to Activision and now Microsoft, but it hasn't changed at all in the CDL era, is this working relationship between developers and the actual competitive, like the competitive ops team. Like, there is no integration, it seems like. They are just like 2 separate entities that just somehow work in the same company or like work in the same umbrella. And it's like we have these things, that these features that come into games that we really like. If we're going to use a throwback, in 2013 Hardpoint becomes a thing. It becomes a really popular game mode in Call of Duty in Black Ops 2. In 2014 with Ghosts, it's not in the game. And we have to completely go to actually 2 different types of game modes, because we end up going with Blitz and we go with Domination. Obviously, Domination sucks. Blitz was not really a competitive game mode. It was just something that we could play competitively. And then each year, like Hardpoint has been in the game since then, I believe. But the 3rd game mode has typically changed. Sometimes it's CTF, sometimes it's Control, sometimes it was Domination. And we have just like, there's just no connection there. There's nothing that it seems that the competitive ops team, what they want, it doesn't really matter to the devs, and maybe vice versa. I'm not completely sure. I'm not in those conversations. Again, you could go back to the transparency, and we could, talk about, like, obviously they're not going to throw the devs under the bus, but it is something that needs improvement. Like, and when the CDL first started, what did we hear? It was a $25 million buy-in, and that the publisher and the developers were going to work hand in hand with the league to kind of create this ecosystem where competitive Call of Duty could thrive. We had this, great like working relationship for the first time. It never happened. I don't think anything changed. I don't think a single thing changed. Because Call of Duty, and we've talked about this before, is not a competitive game. It is a game that just people somehow play competitive. We have a small community in comparison to the broader player base, but we don't really matter all that much, especially with Warzone and how popular Warzone has become over the past 5 years or whatever it's been. And that sucks, because we are literally in the same place that we were. Maybe we were even further behind. I don't know. Like, it just doesn't seem like anything has improved. And part of that is just the competitive ops team. It just kind of has to eat whatever slop the developers give them. and I'm sure the developers don't like that characterization, but it does, and maybe the developers are having to eat whatever slop is given to them by their higher ups. Like, I don't think like that each individual developer necessarily gets to decide what's going on in the game, and I'm sure some of them would love to make the game more competitive and more competitively friendly for our community, but it hasn't happened, and we are kind of stuck the way we have been for, I don't know, like pretty much the exact, like the entire time I've been in competitive, like that's been the case. Like sometimes it's better than others. Like when Rambo went into what do you work for, IW, and
Yeah.
or Sledgehammer, excuse me,
Yeah.
and he worked for and the World War II ranked play was like the most well received ranked play, and like the way like the systems worked was better than they were previously. It just doesn't, like, I don't think there's anybody in like a former pro that's like working for any of those developing companies anymore. So I don't think we have like a real good say or like a representative necessarily, and maybe that hurts us. I don't know, but my rant is over. But that is just something that I think definitely could be improved. I don't know if it will be, but if we're wishing for something, it would be that.
And I do think, I mean, you kind of just mentioned it in passing when you were talking about the modes, but I don't think it was in this off season. I feel like it was during last season, but I know we talked about it on the pod. Whenever it happened, there was the conversation around just like foregoing a third mode in this upcoming game and doing like some sort of veto system where it's like 3 hard points or 3 S&Ds in a series. I don't remember when exactly that conversation happened or how
Yeah, I don't
serious it
remember.
was, but like that's the sort of thing like a the competitive ops team could, you know, step in and do, I feel like, in terms of, you know, control in particular hasn't been particularly well received since Black Ops 4. It felt like it was a little more entertaining and well balanced. Well, I don't know if well balanced is the right word, but
It was
I feel
something
like more
new.
people were at least a little bit excited about it in Black Ops 4, and it was 5v5. There were specialists. There was, you had the slacked slam coming in 5-man slams and jumping on control points and stuff like that. So like, since then, control hasn't been necessarily well received, and you know, we don't know how serious any conversations are about, like, going to only hardpoint or S&D, stuff like that. But that's the sort of thing that could be addressed by the CDL, and that could intersect with uh, more communication and more transparency. So a lot of stuff on this wish list that we're going over is going to be intertwined.
Yeah. Another thing that we kind of mentioned a little bit was like the GA system and how much power necessarily the players get in deciding what kind of game or what kind of esport they want to play. Um, I'm not sure what the best scenario or best solution is for this, because we talked about it before with GAs and how they could be abused, how they can be kind of favored towards certain teams and certain players and their influence. They can essentially bend the CDL to their will or their wants and their needs. I tend not to think that that's not a good way to go about it. Like in a competitive environment where there's only 48 CDL players at a time, there are a section of CDL players that are much more influential in how the game is played. And we're living in the slasher world league at times. Other times we're not living in it, and we again, that's a transparency thing. I think the more transparent that GAs become, the fewer GAs we have, because players don't like to admit that they GA things just because they don't want to do it. And we've seen that in the past before with, I think, snipers maybe last year or 2 years ago, where there was like a majority vote, and then once the GAs went public, it was not a majority vote anymore, and the snipers came back. That's funny how it happens. But that's something that definitely can be improved. I don't know how the CDL goes about fixing it, because you're not going to fix the players. You're not going to convince the players that they should do things that are not in the best interest of their themselves or their teams. There's just no way that you can do that. It's like telling, the NFL players, like, you actually shouldn't do this. Like, it's not, the NBA is a good example. Like the 3-point revolution thing has become like a big point of contention of like whether threes are bad for the NBA or whatever. Like, go tell Steph Curry he shouldn't shoot, 25 threes a game if he can. Like, if he's making half of his threes, then he's going to shoot like as many threes as he really wants, and as many threes as his team wants. And it's kind of the same thing in Call of Duty. Like, players are trying to ban snipers because they're OP. Like, well, if they're OP for everybody, but they're trying to keep them out of the hands of like someone like Simp, who is ridiculously good at it. And, other players that are just like, we don't want to play against this guy with that powerful of a weapon. And the only thing that I could think of as a potential solution, and this would be really unpopular, this would be like really, really unpopular with players, is the CDL coming in and saying, we're actually going to ban this weapon. We're going to ban, like, let's say like the most popular submachine gun for for this section, for starting with the major 2 qualifiers. You can't use the most popular assault rifle. You can't use the most popular submachine gun. The meta will change because we are forcing it to be changed. If you have a problem with it, too bad. We are going to do it regardless. We're going to ban this certain perk. We're going to ban this attachment. And that's the only way that you can go about it. Other esports do this, and it's not uncommon for certain features or certain maps to be just like inactive or disabled for an event. Maybe the CDL should go down this route and say, like, we're forcing you to get outside of your comfort zone. We're going to force you to test out some of the things that you might have already previously banned. Maybe we even ban a map. We don't have that many maps, but like if we had more maps, we would ban this map. We wouldn't allow you to play. What's the map right now that everybody plays? Vault. Like we're going to take out Vault from the rotation. So you're going to have to learn how to play some of these other maps. That's a very radical thing to do. It would be very unpopular among the players, but that is the only thing from my point of view that the CDL could do. Say, hey, like, we're going to change things. We're going to force you to change. I don't know what you thought about that, or just maybe this GA system or the GA environment we have in modern Call of Duty.
No, I think that's a good point. And I was kind of thinking about that. Just in my head, I was thinking like, any other way that the CDL actually addresses GAs. Well, first off, they're just not going to address the term GA itself, because then it's, basically shining a light on the fact that the players are governing themselves to some extent. But I just think in general, like if they did anything other than what you suggested, I feel like I don't know. I just it's a very delicate situation. It would definitely be hard to enforce, because even if the CDL came out and said like we're just going to allow every weapon and not have anything banned or something, like the players would still have GAs to an extent, and it maybe would have to revert back to some of the pre-CDL era stuff where it just wasn't as public, and the player, maybe that's like some sort of way for it to sort of course correct itself. But regardless, I do think like a radical move, like you said, I don't think it's likely. But just using this game as an example, like Black Ops 6, after Major 1, CDL comes out, we're going to ban the AMES or AMES, however you say AR, and the Jackal PDW sub. You got to go figure it out from here. And it would definitely cause an uprising, and it would be very controversial at first. But it would address the one thing that I've always said across multiple episodes now with GAs that I hate the most, is just when stuff gets GA'd at the beginning of the year and then it's never revisited or tested again to any extent. It's just, scrims try it out, or players try it out in a scrim in November, and they're like, nah, screw this. All the teams vote on it. Yeah, it's too OP. Get rid of it. And then it's literally never touched by the pros again over the next 8 months while the game is being played competitively. So I do think just, the whole nature of GAs itself is very controversial until, it circles back to the competitive team, and, just if you have a well designed game that's more balanced, and stuff like that is not going to be as necessary. But we don't live in a world where there's just a game. Call of Duty, as you mentioned just a couple minutes ago, it's not competitively designed. It is a casual game that is played competitively by a niche group of people. So, um, I don't know. It's always going to be a difficult conversation and difficult to find a really good solution in terms of figuring out what you can do for it. But I do think just the thought of the CDL actually like stepping in and doing something radical, like you mentioned, is very interesting. And I know if it did happen for the very first time, it would be like, a holy shit moment. Like I'm thinking of like the SpongeBob meme where like it's all the little SpongeBobs running around in the brain and everything's on fire. Like that's what it would look like. Um, but to your point earlier too, like there's other like Counter-Strike and even Valorant, which is a newer one. I know like the devs have removed maps from the map pool to address certain issues on the maps, and then they're eventually like recycled and brought back into the rotation after the devs make changes to those maps. And that's just something we're not going to see in Call of Duty until if we ever get like that Call of Duty that's made for competitive, like we've talked about, like the COD mobile that's not for mobile, basically. But in a 1 year life cycle COD game, that's never going to happen. Whereas Valorant and CS:GO and CS2, those are, that's one game that is continually updated over the years. So it makes more sense from that perspective. But there is stuff you can take away from that. And like, let's just use, I know like, Red Card and Protocol are probably two of the bigger maps right now that are not particularly enjoyed by a ton of people in Black Ops 6. If they were just straight up removed from the rotation and replaced with something like Raid or Standoff, like a lot of people would be happy about it. And there's the potential that we would never see the maps like Red Card and Protocol return, because if they're replaced by stuff like those iconic maps that we know work well for competitive. But for lack of a better example, there would be that opportunity for the devs to do something like um, CS:GO and Valorant do, to the extent of addressing a map and removing it temporarily to fix some stuff and then bringing it back in. And again, I don't see that happening in a 1 year life cycle COD game, but the potential for it to happen is there, and it would definitely be interesting if it ever did happen.
Yeah, and like I've said, I think that's the only way that you can do it. You have to force the player's hand in that, because I don't think the players are going to, give up. So the like, let's just be real, like the power that they have in shaping the game, and and I'm not saying like it's all like in a bad way. Like I don't think that players are always just like, I'm gonna make this as boring and as uneventful, and I'm gonna like really just do only the things that will benefit me personally. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that there are players that actually are like, it might not benefit me, but it'll benefit the league. It'll benefit just like viewership and how people kind of view Call of Duty. But I think when you like ban snipers or something like that, that's just like a automatic like, no, like this, like the CDL should just start like finding people. Like I kid on that, but like that's stuff that is like actually integral to the Call of Duty esports space. Like sniping in general is like pretty much like I don't know what the equivalent of it, like it's basically like the predecessor to competitive in a way, because there's so many people came from that space into competitive, and then like people kind of pass through competitive into Warzone or other games. So I don't know. We'll see if anything changes, but I do think that would help, and it would definitely create some kind of spice to different like stages, like where you have major one and like this is the meta, and that come major two, the meta is completely different. And I look at Black Ops 2, which was, I still believe the greatest game of all time, even if it's like obviously it's flawed. Like and certain things have definitely been improved since then. Like hardpoint in general, like you could be mathematically eliminated from winning hardpoint it's just a silly thing, but growing pains and all that. But like if you look at the meta of that game, it's wild. Like how much it evolved from day one to the end of the game. By the end of the game, like mostly people played with like the M8, with maybe the AN94, and the sub would like sub was like the MSMC. But before that, you had like the PDW, the MP7, you had the Scorpion, so on and so forth. The ARs, like the FAL was crazy. They had the Cat 40 in the beginning because Clayster was an absolute demon on the map with a FAL and Cat 40. They ended up just saying like these things are banned. Like or I think the FAL might have gotten nerfed to the ground or whatever. But like it evolved, it changed, and I think that's what made it cool because from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, the meta was completely different, and how the teams reacted to the meta made it kind of interesting in a way by itself. Maybe I'm just being nostalgic. Maybe we can't get back there, but I think we have to try, right? We have to try something different than what we've been doing. So hopefully something like that could happen. Another thing that I put on my wish list, and it's always been a pipe dream, is like some kind of integration with challengers. Obviously the challengers thing is completely separate from the CDL. They even made like a different Twitter account that doesn't really ever tweet about challengers for some reason. But it's like not included in the CDL kind of news and notes a lot of times. But they are supposed to be the pipeline for the Call of Duty League, the path to pro, so to speak. And we have seen a lot of players pass through challengers and get into the CDL and have success. But they're really like, if you aren't really trying to pay attention, you would have no idea who these people are. Like it's very, very hard to just like, just accidentally find something about challengers or, who are the best players or like what tournaments are on. And a lot of that comes down to the CDL, or if you want to just like put it up at like Activision, Microsoft, they just don't care about promoting this. And I'm not saying that they had to go out and put billboards out on like New Year's Eve or whatever about like, go watch the Challengers Cup this weekend. I'm not saying any of that, but there should be some kind of crossover, right? These players, you would hope, are eventually going to make their way into the CDL, or are former CDL players that are now trying to fight their way back into the CDL. And why can't we have more tournaments or more events or something where challengers players get the opportunity to play CDL players? And I'm sure the challengers players would love that, because that's the opportunity you need. And it's kind of like a base, like a core of competitive Call of Duty, is like these young upstart guys trying to beat this established team. We've seen this in the past many, many times. A lot of times it'd be like in GBs or in like the 2Ks or the 5Ks, so on and so forth. Like the best example is probably like United in 17, where they're just online warriors until they win a LAN and they beat the top teams and they become these well-known household names. And that's something that we need to push more for, especially in the CDL era where we only have 12 teams. We only have 48 players at a time. There's so many other players around the world that just aren't getting the showcase what they really can do. So maybe just a little more integration, some kind of pro-am, or just maybe more regular pro-ams. I think that would go a long way for the future of challengers. Do you have anything on that?
I was gonna bring up what you just sort of mentioned at the end there with the they've tried, at least in some of these recent years, with the pro-ams and the kickoffs or whatever's happened, but it's been very minimal, and it's only been like a select hand. Or it was there was the pro-am was the mid-season one, and there was it just major one?
Yeah, like major one like 2 years ago, because that was
2 years ago.
LAG like swapped out their roster.
Yeah. So they've tried to, we got to give credit where credit is due, but it hasn't been, over the top, fully committing to integrating it. Definitely. I don't think it's a stretch to say that. I will say, to play devil's advocate, my mindset has definitely changed on um, just that the whole path to pro system really. And I feel like it was since GB is kind of went away, is like we don't have those S&D kids anymore who are underage and playing on GB, playing wagers, playing tourneys and stuff. Then they turn 18 and they feed into the to the pro scene or challengers and then go to pro. But there have been points over the Ego Child's history where early on we would have had the conversation of like we both want all of the CDL franchises to have an academy team, right? And we used to talk about that and how um at least I would compare it to like the minor league system in baseball and stuff, and it's not as extensive, or the G League and the NBA, etc. Um, it feels like now it's just that's just not where the league is headed, and it's not like this outside of Vegas like openly saying like they are trying to develop this all Saudi roster. The other 11 teams, at least with unless they tell us otherwise, like it is a year to year commitment. Like just they are, again, it's gonna be weird to say what I'm about to say, but like they're trying to win in this year, and you can make the argument some of the teams aren't trying to win in this year. And you look at like past Paris Legion and Vegas Legion teams where they were paying players the minimum and just basically like existing, and they weren't necessarily trying to be super competitive, or at least it seemed like they weren't. And you could make the argument, but you look at a team like LAT this year, like it's you know, LAT went from last year having a pretty successful end to the 2024 season at champs in the World Cup with a roster where they openly said they were going to try to, break even. They gave some younger players an opportunity, and now they're just fully flipped the script on that and went for a super team where Nadeshot's taking a pay cut to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like that obviously that's one example, but that's just kind of a good point of illustrating the landscape of competitive Call of Duty at this moment. It's not, in my eyes at least, something where a team, I'll just use like Vancouver Surge for example, because I mean they kind of are doing this to some extent with the young guys like Abuza and O4, where it's like you can sign these players to long-term deals as young amateurs, rookies, etc., and develop them, and they, and then they stick with the team for 5+ years, and they go from these up and coming amateurs to MVPs and tournament winners and stuff like that. And I mean, you can even look at the previous Seattle Surge roster with like Pred and Sib, right? Like that was kind of like one example where there were the talks beforehand of Pred potentially being a target for Optic, and Seattle at the time, Seattle didn't want to come to terms on a buyout or whatever. Like Optic and Hex offered something that apparently Seattle said, and then Seattle upped it, and Optic met it again, then they upped it again, et cetera, all that stuff. Like that Seattle team with Pred and Sid was like they gave them their shot, and like after 2 years, because they signed the 1+1 contracts or whatever, it's just like they're done, and they're gonna go move on to another team that's paying them more money and potentially being, more successful in the case of Pred joining Optic, winning champs, etc. So yeah, I just feel like that the Challengers is in a weird place, and obviously it sucks if you're one of those players in the pit, like just battling it out for a dream to hopefully get to the CDL one day. And each year now, with like Miami coming last year, Vegas coming this year, like especially these NA teams. I mean, you could even say for an EU Challengers player, it's even worse just because now there aren't technically no EU CDL franchises. Like the opportunities for these Challengers players are shrinking until something is addressed where like expansion comes in, or um the teams are required to field a Challengers team, which I don't see happening, especially with the current landscape of just esports and financials in general. So it's really a difficult and tricky situation. Um circling back to like the original conversation of calendars as a whole, like you would love more support from the CDL and Microsoft, whoever, like just hosting more events, especially if it's going to be this thing where it's like limited opportunities for these players to get into the pro league. Like maybe we can have a few more tournaments, even if it's online tournaments, where it's just something to shine a light on these players to try and give them the opportunity to get spotted and potentially get recruited to a CDL team, even if it's a sub spot. We think of someone like Pentagram, who was like, he was talked about for many years in challengers, I feel like, and then he finally got an opportunity on Boston last year. Didn't really work out, and I'm pretty sure he's retired now. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, that's one scenario where somebody plays in the pit for many, many years, gets one opportunity, it doesn't go their way, and they're just done. And like, obviously, it's there. He could have made that choice. We talked about like Fire previously in previous seasons where he, was supposed to be the next up and coming player and didn't really pan out. And then, did he get another opportunity with another team after that? I feel like I can't remember the example we used. But regardless, like there's just always these situations where it's like, people talking about challengers, the league needing to do more with challengers, and it's at the end of the day, it's for what? Like they're dumping more money into the challenger system, and it's not yielding results, or it's not leading to much other than just more players getting a chance to potentially live out a dream. I don't know, that might have been a cynical way to phrase that at the end there. I'm getting a little tired, but yeah, I think in challengers as a whole is just a very difficult conversation to have, just in terms of exactly what its place is in esports in general. Even, I mean, you look at like League of Legends, like there are these academy teams that sometimes yield results for some of these players, but especially in like North America, it's like some of the academy teams in recent years for League of Legends was like retired or former pros and veterans. It's like, it's not the 18-year-old up and coming players. It's people who were recently in the league and kind of didn't play the best, and now they're just competing at a lower level. So I don't know. In general, it's a very finicky, delicate situation, and I kind of rambled there, so I'm rambling now, and I'm going to shut up.
I think it's a good point. A lot of good points that you made. I would say, like, we should mention that there's no perfect system for the path to pro, and that's in esports, that's in traditional sports, because there's always room for, say, abuse or manipulation. Like obviously we're both big fans of like football for a long time, and to this day, college football is the pipeline that the NFL uses for their development. For a long time, those college players didn't get a cent. They got their education paid for, but they were not compensated for this really profitable, like multi-billion-dollar business that they were essentially, providing the labor for. And so now there's a lot of different opinions on like how the players should be paid, like how much they should be paid, so on and so forth. But there's a difference in how that is working, and people disagree about like, is it good for the development or how it affects everything. But I brought that up to say, like, the NFL hasn't figured it out, the NBA hasn't figured it out. Like, even if you look at European soccer, they have not figured it out. Like, for some teams, it's worked. Some teams, they believe they have figured it out. But if you look at European soccer, like, they don't have college sports. They have these academies that are tied to their clubs, like what we've talked about in the CDL, where they have, these kids that are signed from like age 11, and they are like academy players, and they're kind of developed in that system, and that sometimes they're loaned out to other clubs, sometimes they're sold, their contracts are sold to other clubs, sometimes they are brought up, like Messi, for example. He goes to Barcelona as a kid, and he becomes like a major star at Barcelona as an adult. But it's just a completely different world, and I'm not sure. I think the best route for American or North American Call of Duty would be going the college route. Like we had the college COD scene a little bit.
Yeah.
Like Ghosty is, I guess, a product of that because I think he was going to Illinois and then he got brought up to Optic. So like maybe there's something like that. I think that's just the best way because we shouldn't expect that competitive Call of Duty is going to be like financially feasible for a lot of these guys as like a profession, and we should try to set them up for success afterwards. And granted, there's always going to be exceptions. Like Shotzi, he was never going to have to go to college because he was so talented by the time he turned 18 that every team was offering hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure that he signed with their team. Or in the case of Shotzi in particular, like Hastro already had him, or was it Splice had him, and then like sold him basically to Envy. So like there's stuff like that where maybe it won't work. But I think in general, and I want to point out, like there's one of the founders of E United. His name is Daniel Clerk, and he runs the Maryville University like esports program, and they're like one of the best college League of Legends programs in America. And like he's done a really good job. He's very vocal about like the future of Path to Pro is like through college, and I kind of agree with that. I don't know how it would work when you look at like Europe, for example. Obviously, there's just completely different system, a different culture around the Path to Pro. But I think like if we have to go a different route, I think it's probably not putting all of the stress on the actual like the actual CDL teams because they're just not going to do it. And like let's go a different route and say, all right, let's put the onus on these college programs that college programs are college esports programs are becoming more popular and more frequent around the country. And so maybe they can support a Call of Duty Challengers team or something along those lines, and develop these players, and also have the players kind of learn while they're doing it. Actually get some kind of education before they try to make it as a pro. And if they don't make it as a pro, they got an education out of it, and that's a good thing in general. But yeah, let's get off of that. I think the only other stuff that I had was content based. What did you have anything else for the wish list?
The one thing that I put sort of at the end was just addressing expansion. It feels like that's just been a conversation that's been had for literally every year off season since the CDL came into existence, and we've had 12 teams. I mean, there were even rumors over at least 2 of these years that we potentially would have less than 12 teams, not more. So I think it would just be great if we really just like if something can. I feel like Daniel Say maybe on like I think it was like that Raleigh Major one, whether that was 2 years ago now or whatever it was. Like Zuma had him Daniel Say on the flank, and he actually like he talked about it, not to the extent of like giving substantial information, but it was at least addressed. Um, just have like we got the update last year about the future of the league. They talked about like paying back some of the funds for entry fees or whatever it was for some of these teams and stuff. Like maybe that's the answer. And again, tying it in with like the challengers here, and just talking about too like how now with Miami and Vegas Falcons being like region based teams, one way to open up more spots is to have more teams, and how that would happen or what it looks like, etc. We don't have the answers to that, but just having some sort of conversation about whether it will ever actually happen, or hey, maybe like Daniel Say has to come out and just be like, once and for all, no, the CDL is never expanding beyond 12 teams. And I don't think that would happen either, because I just don't see him saying that. But just have again, this is kind of full circle now. All of these wish list things are kind of connected in some fashion. So talking about expansion ties into just getting more communication in general, and that's what we started at with this wish list like an hour ago. So um I think that's the one that's probably the biggest pipe dream out of all of these, really. I mean, it feels like that could be one way to address the importance of challengers and some of these other players. Is, hey, if we've heard, especially as most recent as this offseason, like other organizations like Liquid, Fnatic, Space Station Gaming, like there are organizations, even like Rise Nation. I don't know how recently that was, but like there are esports organizations and companies out there who are still interested in investing in Call of Duty esports. Like having an organization like Cloud9 as recently as this past offseason fully entering COD esports, that kind of like that should be, I don't want to say like I guess it's just sort of like a beacon of light sort of that's like,
Yeah.
it's not all doom and gloom if an organization like Cloud9 is willing to step in at this point where like, financials and stuff in esports are being questioned and whatever the case may be there. So yeah, it might be all full circle there really and tie into just getting more communication. But I guess that's really my final wish list item for 2025 is to get some information on expansion or the possibility of it ever happening, or just maybe we do get that, doomsday scenario where we get some communication that says, yeah, expansion isn't happening, but at least we would get it addressed to some extent. So something on expansion is something I would love to see in 2025.
Yeah, we just need some kind of what is the CDL looking for? Like, what are kind of like the requirements for, when the CDL might make this change? Why, like, what teams, or, they don't have to say like the specific teams, but like, what kinds of organizations are you looking for when you expand? Like, what are some of the requirements that those organizations might have to meet? I still think like it's good to be selective and say, hey, we're not just going to accept any team, any organization into our league, because part of the reason for the CDL, or, I guess like part of the stated mission was like to kind of root out some of the denial esports of the world, like make sure that, Red Reserve can't come back into the league and just completely defraud these players and take advantage of them. So like there's something to be said for that. I don't know how well it's worked because we've had so many like LAG situations, and like the Boston breach is like up in the air, like what's actually going to happen with that. But I do agree with you. Like it was a very encouraging sign to see Cloud9 and then also G2 Esports, who bought the Minnesota Rocker. Like these were two major esports organizations buying into the idea, at least in theory, of Call of Duty esports at a time where everybody seemed to be like running away from it. And I think that's great. I want to see more endemic esports organizations. Like I am like an esports elitist in a way. Like I don't really, now that we've gone through the esport, or we're in the esports winter, I really don't care about these like non-endemic brands that are coming in, like the like Robert Crafts of the world. Like I just don't really give a damn if they're a part of Call of Duty esports, because esports can survive and thrive with Cloud9 Jack. We could, Liquid Steve, whoever the Fnatic CEO is. Like we can have these actual endemic esports brands and succeed. And like I think it would, I think people are more attached to Fnatic, for example, than they are to the Boston Breach or Oxygen Esports, because that wasn't a thing like 5 years ago. Like it was just a thing that they popped up like when they started the Overwatch League. So, I would love to see expansion. They have to be selective. They have to be smart about it. But there are definitely some organizations and teams that would definitely be good candidates for expansion at this point.
And to be fair, there are definite like questions around the logistics of expansion to begin with, because I mean we got that post that I was talking about, the future of the Call of Duty League last year, where it says, straight up, outstanding entry fees will be eliminated and any fees previously collected from teams will be returned in full. That raises the question then, like, what are, if dating all the way back to the beginning, like OGLA/Immortals sells to LAT, but OGLA had to pay to enter the league, and then LAT had to pay them a lot of money. So is LAT getting paid, refunded what they paid for that? And then even like C9 as recently as this year, like are they being refunded whatever they had to pay New York, because New York paid to get into the league? And And then with expansion, like if the CDL comes out and says, yeah, we're opening up 4 more spots, like how does that even work? Because it's not like there's going to be a bidding war over the spots if you don't have to pay. And or is this saying like expansion teams do have to pay entry fees, but then the other pre-existing teams don't? Like there's still a lot of questions around how logistically expansion would work if it ever happened. But I do think uh full circle, that would be one way to get more of these challengers players into the pro league. It would get, you know, I still think 16 teams at a minimum is just a great number for like a bracket play
Yeah,
system. It
that's
would
what we're
even
used
open
to.
up it would open up the return to 4 pools for potential pool play and those MLG-esque tournament formats from back in the day. Um, and it all ties into just again, more communication, more transparency, and all that good stuff that we've been yapping about now for a while.
Yeah, and the last thing, so we can finish on a nice tight 90 minutes here. The only thing I had left on the wish list was just a bunch of different ideas for content or events for the CDL. Obviously, this is the first year of the minor, which I think, in theory, sounds like a great idea to kind of break up the monotony of the qualifiers, because we've talked about in the past, nobody wants to watch 4 or 5 straight weeks of qualifiers, especially early in the season where the standings are still kind of like, okay, like you might lose a bunch of games but you could still make it up in the back end. It's a little bit different obviously toward the end of the season where you have the standings implications and like, are you going to champs if you lose these 3 matches and so on and so forth. So the minor is a good idea and I'm really in favor of it. Even if it's online or offline, like I know it's online now. I don't care really. Like that's not something that I care about. That's something the players should care about, but not necessarily the viewers at large. Like on a, like obviously you want fans and you want the environment, but I just want more different stuff from the CDL, and that's one way to do it. I would love to see in the future we have a minor for each of the stages throughout the season. We only have 2 so far this season. I also this is stuff like outside of the CDL necessarily, but it's something that Activision or Microsoft should be pushing for. S&D only tournaments involving these players. Like just put up $1,000 prize pool and say, hey, we're gonna stream it on the Call of Duty YouTube channel. Which 20 players want to be a part of this tournament, or open it up to the entire league or whatever and say we're doing these S&D only tournaments. Let's start doing tournaments like 1v1, 2v2, 3v3s, and put up money, because I know the players get very motivated by that, and have them kind of compete against each other in a non-CDL format. Because we don't have S&D tournaments nearly as much nowadays as we did, which was something to give players something to stream. And that's part of it, is like give the players content that they can stream and make content out of, because they don't like doing it with scrims, which are the only other thing that really people care about. Like they don't care if like people are pub stomping necessarily. So 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, 4v4 S&D tournaments would be, in my opinion, really entertaining. And something I've talked about for literally years at this point is a Money Eights League. We've seen it in Counter-Strike with the FPL, or I know it's like ESEA Pro at some point. Like that is something I think Call of Duty should implement. Like put up a pot of $5,000 for a month. And what was it? Breaking Point had their
Yeah.
Money Eights League. So something like that. I maybe even partner with Breaking Point and say like, hey, do you guys want to help us run this? And we can split something, or we could just give you some advertising or whatever, just something like that to help the players produce content where they don't have to think about it. They just go and they play. You could see these different players like intertwine with each other and communicate with each other. Money Eights was definitely something that I got hooked onto, like watching players when I was getting into Call of Duty. I mean, so, very memorable moments happen in those kinds of streams. I'm not sure if the CDL wants to promote that kind of stuff, but like I don't see what the difference is between playing Money Eights and gambling or whatever versus like don't they get some kind, or at some point they got money for each win that they got, or the bounties, the stupid bounties that have happened in the CDL where they're like, these matches are $5,000. Like, who cares? Like, that's not something that people necessarily care about, but it would actually matter if you said that this Money Eights session is worth $5,000. People would actually care. People would tune in. And I think that's something that the CDL should do. So that was just, in general, I just want to see more content and event-based stuff that can kind of entertain people maybe outside of the match days and outside of the whatever 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock window we have for CDL matches every week. So that was my wish list. I think we're pretty good on wish lists. Obviously we're going on an hour and a half now, so we apologize if you were expecting like a short episode or whatever, but this is what happens when we talk about the CDL in general. We don't talk about specific teams. We start to ramble and we start to talk quite a bit about it. But CDL matches are actually coming back next week. The first minor that I just mentioned, starts on January 10th, which I believe is a Friday, and it runs through that weekend. And then the actual qualifiers return the following week on January 17th. So I'm not sure exactly. Bink and I are going to hash it out off stream, but we're going to figure out what we're doing for the minor preview. Typically we would do it like the episode before the minor begins, but we actually have 2 episodes. We have the Sunday episode and then next Wednesday. So we're not exactly sure how we're going to preview the minor, but please expect that over the next week or so, that we're gonna go through what we think is going to happen, give our first round predictions, give the winner predictions and all that stuff. So I think that about does it. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow or like the podcast feed wherever you're listening, watching on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. It's obviously on YouTube as well. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2 Ks, at Pres Byers. Podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. And we should be back on Sunday. I believe that is the 4th, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's the 4th. And whatever date it is, we will be back on Sunday night to talk about all things Call of Duty League and all things Call of Duty esports related. And the podcast will be up in your feeds on Monday morning as usual. But yeah, that does it for me. I'm tired of talking. I'm exhausted from talking. So Bink, take it away.
Me too. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support, though. Really appreciate it. Like Preston said, we'll actually have some Call of Duty matches once again to talk about, even if it's just a preview of them in the next couple episodes. But we're moving on from this little saga filler stuff that we've had to do here over the holiday break, where we once again were in a position with no matches to actually cover. So we're getting back in the swing of things with matches coming up less than 10 days away now. So thank you guys for riding this out with us and supporting all the content recently. Shout out Preston again for all the YouTube videos he's been doing and all that stuff. It's been awesome to see, and the support behind that and all that stuff. So yeah, thank you guys as always. We'll see you back here when we do again. And